Hey, Alan Rabinowitz here for Red Giant TV. If you've worked with Magic Bullet looks, then you know how ridiculously awesome it is for creating different moods and styles for your live action footage. But did you know that you can also use looks to alter and improve your motion graphics? Well, in this episode of Red Giant TV, Apple certified master trainer, Adobe certified expert, UK resident, and all-around great guy, Simon Walker will show you how you can use looks in your motion graphics work, even if you've never touched a motion graphics program like After Effects or Motion and you're strictly a video editor. Take it away, Simon.
Hey everyone, Simon Walker here. We're very accustomed to tweaking and colour correcting video footage in post-production to make it look better. But I want to show how you can adjust and improve the look of motion graphic sequences using Magic Bullet looks in a similar way that you would approach grading a video clip. This can be much faster than going back into the graphics editor to adjust elements, especially if you're just changing the colour, which really helps when you're at the sharp end of a deadline. So here I've got an After Effects composition sitting on a Premiere Pro timeline, and I'd like to change the look and the feel. I'll add Magic Bullet Looks as a filter to the clip, and then I'll open up the Looks interface. Looks has got some very useful tools to be able to target certain colours, blur specific areas on the screen, and also add light effects and lens flares, the sort of things that can make graphic stings look more visually dynamic. But in this case, I want to tint this background so it appears blue. So, the fastest way to do this is to remove the colour with the saturation tool, sliding the saturation level down to 0, and then to add the warm cool tool to choose an appropriate colour. This method colours the different grayscale levels with the same blue, so I've got a uniform spread of the hue across the image with different luma values according to the underlying image. If you want a blend of colours across the frame, you could add a couple of instances of the gradient tool. So you can run two different colours into each other at different angles, with the strength automatically stretching out following how much you drag the on-screen controls. And you can update the strength setting and the other controls on the tool itself, for example using the fall-off to weight the gradient towards one end or the other. It's usually a good idea to throw on an auto shoulder tool as well to automatically round down the overbrights so that they are in the legal range. Here they are on the scopes, and here's the before and after. The nice thing about the auto shoulder tool is that it rounds down the values rather than just clamping them, which means you don't get a colour change or odd banding effect. It results in a more natural reduction of those really bright values. It's very easy to accidentally overshoot the luma levels when preparing motion graphics, especially ones which have got bright text or you've got lighting effects as part of the design, which we've got here. If I'm preparing this background to place elements in front of it, I can use the vignette tool to darken the edges and create an area of interest. As well as being helpful to focus the viewer's attention on the part of the screen I want them to be looking at, adding vignettes to graphical backgrounds like this helps to exaggerate the colour blends, which also adds to the visual interest. The swing tilt tool can help to add visual interest as well. It's originally designed to help you fake depth of field, so it blurs the image everywhere except on the central axis. Sometimes the unblurred area is quite narrow, so to increase the area that isn't blurred, you can zoom right out of the preview window, and you can drag out the control handles. This extends the middle non-blurred area and makes the effect a little more subtle, especially if you change the blur size. And this can be interesting if you've got animated text coming in from off-screen, which can be made to appear to be coming into focus when it comes out of one of the blurred areas. You can do a similar thing with the edge softness tool, the key point being to focus attention on a specific area in the image. Everything inside the central radius of the tool is in focus, and everything outside is blurred, according to how much blur I've set up in the tool controls. The default value of 3 tends to be too obvious as an effect though, so I often use a value of somewhere between 1 and 2, but of course it depends on the background I'm using. Once I'm happy with the tools I've set up, I can save this as a custom preset by typing in the look name field and then hitting return or enter. This then stores the preset in the custom section. Although I can still continue to add tools to this effect, even though I've made a preset. The spot exposure tool can be handy to identify an interest on screen. It's got very similar controls to the vignette and the edge softness tools. And if you drag an aspect control, those small dots on the edge of the radius, and then resize it, you can create interesting graphical highlights on the background. This can be useful if the background you're working on doesn't have a lighting scheme or it doesn't have a series of gradients in the first place. Also, the highlight will interact with the other tools in the chain, so here the spot exposure becomes less bright when I drag it and it interacts with the vignette. If you find that you're constantly manipulating a tool to get a certain range of settings, then you can always save it as a custom tool by double-clicking on its name, typing in your own custom name, and then it will be available with those specific settings as a custom tool inside the relevant tool section, near to the original tool. Actually, this spot exposure technique is used in one of the presets that ships with looks, in the stylized section. Streetlight is designed to simulate the sort of lighting you get at night when standing under a street lamp. That's why it's got a lot of dark edges. The spot exposure deliberately tails off towards the bottom of the frame as it's interacting with a gradient exposure. And there's a color gradient angled to shine yellow from above as a virtual light source. So this is a much more dramatic feel for this image. Of course, using the inbuilt presets is a really fast way of setting up a shot and then going on to tweak individual tools. There may be times you want to keep the overall look of a background and only slightly adjust it. So, for example, you might like the general movement, but you just want to soften some of the lines, reducing the fine detail. Or you might want to exaggerate those lines and bring out more of the detail in the background. The pop tool was designed to manipulate the local contrast in an image. It looks for the edges and either smooths out or emphasizes them. So it acts like either a sharpening or a softening tool, depending on whether you drag the pop setting to a positive or a negative value. Because it's designed to either enhance or reduce the local contrast, the size control adjusts the tolerance of that local contrast. So a higher setting for pop and size will bring out much more detail. If you've got access to the original source file, you can of course make these adjustments directly in the host application. So in this case, I can jump over to After Effects and edit the original file. Since we're in After Effects, I can use an adjustment layer to apply magic bullet looks to all the layers at the same time, so I can affect the entire background. This is one of the presets from Harry Frank's set of looping backgrounds for Trapcode Suite. This is a whole set of pre-designed animated backgrounds, using for the most part Trapcode Form to create these really nice animated shapes. And I happen to be using Windows, but these techniques work identically on a Mac as well. In fact, Magic Bullet Looks and the Trapcode Suite are cross-platform, so I could save this project and transfer it over to a Mac and continue to work there if I need to. By the way, if you've got Looks installed on your system, then any custom presets are shared across all the compatible hosts on your machine. So I've got access to the same preset I set up and saved in Premiere Pro. And since this is an After Effects file sitting on the timeline in Premiere Pro, any changes I make to it are automatically updated in Premiere because of the way the two applications talk to each other via dynamic link. This is a quick way of updating an After Effects file without having to render it out and then import it again. However, we don't always have access to the original After Effects files. Often as editors, we are sent pre-rendered flattened video clips to work with. So here I've got the same animated background, but rendered out as a video file. And I've added a text layer above it with a couple of keyframes to animate the text position. This approach gives me the ability to easily change the text from within Premiere Pro without having to change the background as well. And since you can apply adjustment layers in Premiere Pro now, I've applied looks to an adjustment layer on the top level, the top channel, to affect both the layers below. In fact, using an adjustment layer is a good way of adding a virtual strength slider to looks. You can use the layer opacity control to set how much of the look you want to mix with the clips below. The higher the opacity setting, the more of the look you're applying. And you can also command click or control click on Windows on the opacity bar to set keyframes. So this is a handy way of animating the strength of a treatment. Now I want to add a slight glow to this text. You can control the amount of diffusion really nicely from within looks using the diffusion tool. So adding a standard diffusion tool adds diffusion to the entire image. But if you increase the highlights only and the highlight bias settings, then you can limit the diffusion to the brightest areas only. In this case, the bright text. I see this effect a lot on the BBC idents here in the UK, where they have a strong colour background with bright superimposed text, and they've added a slight diffused glow to the text. You've probably noticed that the glow is being added to all the highlights, so this includes the highlight at the top right of the background as well. No problem, I can reduce the intensity of that glow with a spot exposure with a negative value, or by adding a vignette. The problem with adding a vignette, though, is that it's processed after the diffusion tool, so the diffusion is still being applied to all the highlights before the vignette is applied. By default, Looks doesn't let you reorder the position of tools to process before their relative sections. All the tools are processed in the order of the section in which they appear, so by default you can't just drag the tools to a new position. But you can drag them if you press the Option key on a Mac or the Control key on Windows. So this is the secret hidden feature to be able to drag them out of position. Now with the vignette being processed before the diffusion tool, the top right of the background is now darker because of the vignette, and so the diffusion glow is being limited to the brightest areas in the image. Don't forget to include an auto shoulder tool when adding diffusion effects, of course, because of the bright values. Another tool that lets you target certain areas is the film grain tool. The problem with nice shiny computer-generated graphics is that they're too perfect. And they can look jarring when you've got to cut them into a sequence of filmed footage, especially if that footage is slightly grainy, which is why we sometimes need to grunge up our nice pristine graphics. By adding grain, we are attempting to minimize the difference between the photographic footage and the clean computer-generated footage. But equally, you still need text to be readable. So this is why it's nice to be able to suppress the grain in the highlights with this tool, which is perfect if you've got bright text. So you can grunge up the background, but still keep the text clean and readable. Actually, this is another use for an adjustment layer. You can add a uniform amount of grain to multiple clips. So this adds it to whichever ones are positioned underneath the adjustment layer. It also means that if you change your mind, you only need to change the settings once on the adjustment layer, rather than having to change settings on filters on multiple clips. The same goes for running a brightness levels check along your entire timeline, by adding an auto shoulder tool to an adjustment layer, which will analyze and round down the different overbright levels of each individual clip, saving you from having to do this on each one separately, which is a real time saver. Looks also comes with a mask. This next clip is another of Harry Frank's After Effects presets, but this time it's using trapcode particular to animate these text particles. Actually, it's a free preset downloadable from Red Giant People, Red Giant's community sharing site. This clip has looks applied to it, but I'm using edge softness to add a heavy blur to almost the entire image. But the reason you can see the text in the image in Premiere Pro is because I've switched on the power mask. This is an alternative to using a vignette or edge softness inside Looks itself, as it's keyframeable as you're applying it as a mask. In Premiere Pro, any parameter with a stopwatch icon next to it means that you can set keyframes for it. This is useful if you need to keyframe the mask to follow an element or allow for movement within the animation. It also means that you can change your mind about the size and the shape of the area you're applying the effect to right up until the last minute. But what if you're working on a piece that's a flattened, rendered movie, and you need to make a small adjustment or change a specific colour, or add a bit of a flourish? This is a really nice template animation from Cassidy Byche's Text Effects Volume 2 for Trapcode Suite. It's called Orb Text Creator. But although I've got access to the original After Effects file, I'm going to change some of the elements using Magic Bullet Looks. And here I'm using a rendered flattened video file exported from After Effects. So I'm simulating the common situation where you don't have access to the original source file. Or perhaps you do, but you haven't got time to open it up and you've only got time to make some changes on your editing timeline. Oh, and suspend your disbelief. I'm pretending that we don't need to change the text. We're going with Orb Text Creator as the title text. What I'm wanting to do here is to show you how to change a single colour. In this case, I want to change the colour of the orange particles, which I can do with the ranged HSL tool, the ranged hue, saturation and lightness tool. I can drag the orange pin to target just the oranges, and drag it into the centre of the hue saturation wheel to desaturate them. So I'm adjusting the orange elements, making them less obvious, so the overall effect leaves the blues and the greens as the dominant colours. I can also adjust the saturation control directly, or type in a value if I want to make sure I don't change the hue when I'm dragging the control pin. This has removed most of the orange, but I can further tweak this by adding a curves tool and then selecting the red curve so I can target just the shadows and the midtones and bring down their brightness until they're not visible. If I click on the toolchain button, which disables all the tools, showing you the before and after versions of the effect, you can see in the scopes that I'm successfully targeting the red channel. And you can also see in the vector scope that the colour balance of the whole image is much more weighted to the blues and the greens of this shot rather than to the warmer areas of the scope. Because this is based on a colour selection, the orange elements have now been reduced for the entire shot. This is a great fast method to make quick adjustments. Alternatively, you might want to exaggerate a specific colour. You can use the same procedure, but instead you can boost or saturate one of the colours. Dragging the pin outside the wheel saturates that colour. So I can bring out the orange or even push it towards red. This is a more accurate technique for specific colours than using the three-way colour corrector, as it's targeting just a certain range of colours, a bit like a secondary colour correction. So now the saturated colour is exaggerated for the whole shot. In fact, this looks nicer. There's a reason why orange elements are included in this file. They're the opposite side of the colour wheel. They're complementary colours to the bluey greens in the shot. If you own Magic Bullet Suite, then you have access to all the plugins that ship with it. It's worth pointing out that Colorista is very useful to be used in conjunction with Looks. It has the same HSL colour selection tools, a keyframeable pop slider, so this is the same as the pop control inside Looks, but you can animate its intensity, and Colorista has also got keyframeable masks both in the secondary and the master sections. You've also got all the other colour correction controls and tools that exist in Colorista, including the keyer in the secondary section. So you can set up Looks to change the overall look and feel of the shot, and then fine-tune specific colours or areas with Colorista. For example, like moving a vignette to follow an element across the screen, or using animated masks to limit the range of the correction to a specific area. The thing about producing motion graphics, though, is the final 10%. That little extra attention to detail that really makes all the difference. Lux has a few tools that help you bring out that detail, or add an additional visual flourish. The Haze Flare tool is designed to mimic the internal lens reflections that you sometimes get from certain older lenses. We can use it to add some nice, interesting visual light effects. I've added it to this shot to create some light leaks at the edge of the frame. They're responding to the movement that's happening on screen, and they're also reflecting the colours of the animation. What's interesting is the way the Haze Flare tool reacts to elements near the edge. So it's not reacting to the text in the centre, just the particles zooming past the camera, which makes it a more subtle effect. Haze Flare sits in the lens section in Lux. I've set the matte box shade to stretch to the edge of the frame, and I've set the spillage reach and exposure to lower values so that the overall effect isn't too bright. I've also tinted the main colour to be bluey green, so the dominant colour matches the animation, but Haze Flare also automatically picks up and mixes in some of the colours from the scene. You can drag down the softness to give these lights more definition, depending on how much of the effect you want to add. It's a beautiful piece to begin with, but it's now enhanced with lens flare elements generated by Lux, which are being animated by the movement on screen, so I haven't had to keyframe anything. You can use this effect in conjunction with the anamorphic flare tool. The nice thing about anamorphic flare is that you can set it to be influenced by the brightest pixels in the image, in this case the display text. I've reduced the size it defaults to significantly, so it's a more subtle effect, and I've changed the colour to match the blues in the scene. If you need to, you can adjust the threshold to make sure you're picking up the brightest pixels, and switch on the threshold so it shows up when you're adjusting it. If you want to make it brighter, you can also increase the boost setting. Although you can set the predominant colour of the flare, just like the Haze Flare tool, this tool also reacts to the colours in the scene, so you get a nice mix of colours. The tool is engineered to mimic reflections of the kind you sometimes get from older lenses, to spill and bounce light reacting to elements in the scene in interesting and dramatic ways. Because I've reduced the size parameter and I've changed the colour, it matches the Haze Flare effect. And as the animation progresses, the anamorphic flare interactively reacts to the brightness of the text as it changes, again without having to set any keyframes, which is really nice. So I've got two effects going on here, one reacting to elements at the edge of the image, and another one reacting to the brightest areas, both of them animating themselves. When you install Magic Bullet Lux, you also get a series of misfire filters designed to simulate different types of film damage, replicating problems caused by dust, dirt, film wear, irregular exposure, or improper storage. The idea is that they allow you to grunge up your original footage. We're going to use them to mess up our nice, pristine, computer-generated graphics to make them look a bit more natural or a bit more interesting. The nice thing is that many of them automatically animate their own parameters, so you don't have to set keyframes. This is another After Effects template from Cassidy Beischer's Text Effects Volume 2 for Trapcode Suite. This one's called The Burst. This is nice and clean, but I want to mess it up. I want to add a little flickering as the text animates towards the camera. Misfire flicker causes the image brightness to change from frame to frame. This is similar to the uneven brightness caused by the degradation of an old film print. There are just two controls, frequency and flicker amount. The frequency specifies the percentage of frames in a sequence that will change. So 50% means that half of the frames will change in brightness. But not just every other frame, it varies which frames have the flicker applied. So it's a non-uniform effect. The really interesting thing is that it flickers the darker areas more than the brighter ones, which makes it more visually compelling. You can, of course, exaggerate this by manipulating the darker and lighter areas of the text. I've added an instance of looks above flicker in the filter stack, so looks is being processed first. I'm using a heavy vignette to make the brightness of the text uneven, especially as it zooms towards the camera. The swing tilt tool makes things a bit more interesting by blurring the text, especially as it gets bigger, along an angled plane. I've tinted the text color with these two tools, and the pop tool sharpens the edges of the text slightly. It makes it stand out a bit more. So when I drag the flicker amount slider, the flickering affects the darker areas more than the lighter areas. So the combination of these two filters together is creating a more interesting look. Also, if you then add another instance of looks after the flicker filter, I've added another looks filter with haze flare added to it, the animated flicker changes the intensity of the flare, again without having to set keyframes. In this way, it can be very quick to stack multiple filters on top of each other to get an interesting effect. It's definitely worth experimenting with more of the misfire filters to grunge things up. Although many of them animate themselves, you can also keyframe the strength of the settings if you need to. There's one more thing I'd like to show you, which is applying lens distortions within looks. Here's the burst clip again. This time I've added a spherical lens distortion, which gives the text a 3D curved appearance, which is exaggerated as the text approaches the camera. The lens distortion tool is in the lens section in looks, and it's easy to just drag on the screen controls to get a fisheye lens effect. This can spice up the look of flat text and add a little bit of extra interest. You can further exaggerate the effect by adding lens flare elements. This makes it much easier to see because of the bending of the lines across the screen. To further enhance the lens effect, it's good to add some chromatic aberration as well. In this case, I've added some separation to two of the channels. This suggests the real-world problem of light splitting at the edge of a poor quality lens. It helps sell this fake lens effect. The imperfect nature of this effect reminds us of something that's been filmed, rather than something that's been generated on the computer. The chromatic aberration, interestingly, has a nice colour effect on the edge particles, and actually gives them an extra 3D quality, which makes them seem as if they are closer to the virtual camera. So the general idea behind all of these techniques is you're on a deadline. You need to come up with something good, and you need to do it quickly. What tools do you have available, and what's the fastest way to do it? You might not have time to generate something from scratch, in which case you could download a template or a preset from Red Giant People to get you started. Or you might have to add some visual extras to graphics that have been given to you. Either way, hopefully some of these techniques can help you out. So until the next time, good luck and have fun.
Thanks, Simon. Well done. If you enjoyed this tutorial and you want to learn more about Simon, check out his website at www.simonwalkerfreelance.com. There you can find his blog, tutorials, and an exhaustive list of the many growing subjects in which he is certified to train. Also, if you're doing wedding or event videography or photography, check out Simon's Guru Preset Pack, Weddings and Events for Looks, perfect for adding real emotion into your client's or your own wedding video or photo album. For even more looks from Simon, check out Simon Walker's Master Artists for Looks, available at redgiant.com. Don't forget, you can download a free trial version of Magic Bullet Looks 2 at redgiantsoftware.com, and you can get tons of free presets for Red Giant plugins on redgiantpeople.com. And speaking of free, check out Magic Bullet Colorista Free and Luck Buddy, 2 free color correction plugins. That's right, free. Hey, who else gives you that kind of love? You can find those at redgiantsoftware.com. Finally, I want to mention that if you're looking to keep up with what we're doing at Red Giant, whether it's a tutorial, contest, product release, or whatever, just follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or on our blog. Once again, I'm Aaron Rabinowitz for RedGiantTV.com. I'll see you next time.